A lot of things happened during quarantine. One thing in particular was the release of the binge-worthy documentary from Netflix called The Tiger King. Who is the Tiger King? A fellow by the name of Joe Exotic. His real name is Joseph Allen Scribvolts. He was born March 5th, 1963 in Garden City, Kansas. He is 57 years old and is currently serving a 22-year prison sentence after being convicted by a federal jury for 2 counts for murder for hire, 8 counts of violating the Lacey Act for falsifying wildlife records, and 9 counts of violating the Endangered Species Act. But wait, who did he try to have murdered, and what is this about wildlife and endangered species? Well, I can tell you. Joseph, but let's just call him Joe for short. He grew up on a farm in Kansas with his family. He is the middle child of 4 siblings. His father moved the family around a lot, from Kansas to Wyoming to Texas. Joe was bullied a lot in high school, and through his adolescence, he began to realize that he is homosexual. So after graduating high school, he becomes the police chief in a small town in Texas called Eastvale. But it did not take long for Joe Exotic to realize that being a police chief was not his cup of tea. Now, everything I'm going to tell you takes place at Greater Winey Wood Exotic Animal Park, but for short, we're going to call it GW Zoo. Now, Joe Exotic lives, breathes, even sleeps with tigers. Get it? He's the Tiger King. So word gets around fast about the GW Zoo. It becomes pretty popular, and one day Joe Exotic gets a phone call about 2 abandoned tigers near the zoo. So what does a Tiger King do? He goes and rescues them. So we have 2 tigers, they breed, they have little baby cubs. Before you know it, Joe Exotic now owns a petting zoo. But it doesn't take long for Joe Exotic to realize that he needs help with all of these animals at his zoo. So he finds help, but not only that, Joe Exotic, he finds himself a husband named Travis. So business is booming, except for one of his employees getting their hand bitten off by a tiger, and then later on there's allegations that all of this food that he was feeding these animals were old and expired meat. But other than that, everything's fine. Now, in the era of Joe Exotic, meet Carol Baskin. Carol Baskin is an animal activist, and she has her own animal sanctuary in Florida called Big Cat Rescue. Now, Carol Baskin finds fault in a lot of what Joe Exotic does, from the way he cares for his animals to, just the placement of them in the zoo and everything. So she doesn't like him. Joe Exotic doesn't like Carol Baskin. He even gets to the point where he slanders her on social media. He writes derogatory, negative songs about her. He even talks a lot of smack about her on his webcast TV show. He even went to the point where he changed the logo for the GW Zoo to look almost exactly like her logo for Big Cat Rescue. So Carol Baskin sues Joe Exotic. Joe Exotic countersues her for something. But in the end, Carol Baskin wins. And Joe Exotic has to pay Carol Baskin $1 million. The kicker here is Joe Exotic does not have $1 million. So along comes this mysterious, bald-headed, rich guy from Vegas. His name is Jeff Lowe. Jeff Lowe talks Joe Exotic into signing the GW Zoo over to Jeff Lowe so that Joe Exotic can get out of paying Carol Baskin $1 million. So Joe Exotic signs it over to Jeff Lowe, A couple of other things, dramatics happen and all. Oh, I forgot to tell you. So, in the middle of all of this, Joe's husband Travis shoots and kills himself in the GW Zoo gift shop. But don't worry. Joe Exotic finds another husband 2 months later. So now that Jeff Lowe owns the GW Zoo, he brings in one of his friends as a handyman. This gentleman, his name is Alan Glover. Joe Exotic asked Alan Glover, would he kill Carol Baskin for him? Alan Glover agrees and takes the money, but he doesn't carry out the hit. Murder for hire, count number 1. So a lot of more dramatic things happen between Joe and Jeff and the zoo and Carol Baskin. So Joe Exotic finally comes to terms and says, I'm leaving. I'm going to find a fresh start. Him and his husband, they move away. In December of 2017, Joe Exotic tries one more time to have someone murder Carol Baskin for him. Joe Exotic gets in contact with this gentleman whom he offers to pay money for if this gentleman will kill Carol Baskin. This gentleman just so happens to be an FBI agent. Murder for hire count number 2. And on September 7th of 2018, Joe Exotic was arrested. He is still in prison to this day. He has tried to appeal to the president, Donald Trump, to ask for a pardon because he is innocent, but he was found guilty. During his trial, a lot of his former employees at the zoo, they testified against Joe Exotic, and that is where a lot of the convictions for the Endangered Species Acts and for the violating the acts of the Lacey Act, those things came into fruition was because of testimony from his previous employees.